So today we're diving into a group of poets who basically set fire to the entire rulebook of English literature. They were young, they were pretty radical, and they kicked off an artistic rebellion that, believe it or not, we can still feel today. This is the story of the younger Romantics.
Okay, when I say the word romantic, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Maybe love poems, grand gestures, that kind of thing. Well, I want you to take all of that and just throw it out the window, because the reality was something way more revolutionary.
Yeah, this wasn't about romance at all. It was a full-blown artistic and intellectual revolt. We're talking about a movement that wanted to tear down centuries of established order and replace it with something totally new, something deeply personal, and something incredibly powerful.
To really get this rebellion, though, you have to understand the world they were pushing back against. And let me tell you, it was a world of super rigid structures and authority you just did not question.
The battle lines were so clearly drawn. On one side, you had what's called the neoclassical Age of Reason, which was all about logic, order, and following these ancient dusty rules. And on the other side, the Romantics. They championed the exact opposite: intense emotion, spontaneity, and most importantly, the power of your own individual instinct.
And look, this wasn't just about how you write a poem. For something like 500 years, the basic building blocks of society, politics, religion, your social status, were completely locked in place. The king ruled, the church told you what was right and wrong, and everybody knew their place. You didn't question it.
But then, that stable, predictable world got hit by two massive political earthquakes. And the shockwaves they sent across the Atlantic sparked a totally new way of thinking about everything.
You can see it happen like a chain reaction. First, the American Revolution comes along and proves, hey, you can challenge a king and win. Then the French Revolution unleashes these electrifying ideas of liberty and equality for all. It was really only a matter of time before that revolutionary spirit spilled over into the world of art and literature.
And just like that, the whole conversation changed. The focus suddenly snapped away from the divine right of kings and landed squarely on the rights and the dignity of the average person. It was a huge shift.
Now, this new way of thinking first found its voice with the group we now call the older Romantics. You can think of them as the pioneers, right? They started the rebellion, but they did it quietly in a more intellectual way.
I mean, just listen to this. William Wordsworth defined poetry as a spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling. Now, that might sound nice, but at the time, that was a direct attack on the old way of doing things. He was basically saying poetry isn't about following a checklist of rules, it's about raw, unfiltered emotion just spilling over the old boundaries.
And this is where we see a major split in the movement. That first generation, guys like Wordsworth and Coleridge, they were the thinkers. They came up with the new ideas, but they mostly stayed, well, respectable. But the second generation, they were the activists. They didn't just write about rebellion, they lived it. And because of that, they often ended up as social outcasts, even exiles.
Which brings us to our main event, the younger, wilder rebels. We're talking about Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, and John Keats. These guys took the ideas of that first wave and just cranked the volume all the way up to 11.
So first up, we've got Lord Byron. Seriously, think of him as the original rock star. He was an aristocrat, he was handsome, he was incredibly scandalous, and he used his fame to rebel against the very system that made him famous in the first place.
Byron was such a paradox. Here's a guy who was literally a lord, but he spent his time attacking the aristocracy. He completely defied the strict social and sexual rules of his day, very publicly. His greatest weapon was this sharp, satirical humor, which he used in massive poems like Don Juan to mock all of European society. His life got so scandalous that he was basically run out of England.
Okay, next up is Percy Bysshe Shelley. Now, if Byron was the celebrity rebel, Shelley was the philosophical rebel. He was absolutely driven by radical ideas about politics, religion, you name it.
So just like Byron, Shelley came from a noble family, but he spent his life championing the common man. He was so radical, he got himself kicked out of Oxford for publishing a pamphlet about atheism. He even wrote essays defending vegetarianism, which was a seriously fringe idea back then. And maybe the most shocking thing of all, he argued that in Milton's epic poem, Paradise Lost, the real hero was actually Satan for having the guts to defy the ultimate authority figure, God himself.
And finally, we have John Keats. Now, what's so interesting about Keats is that unlike the other two, he came from a pretty humble, ordinary family. So his rebellion wasn't really social or political, it was purely artistic.
He had this revolutionary new idea about what it actually means to be a true artist. He came up with this idea he called negative capability. It's a bit of a weird name, but the concept is amazing. Keats believed that the greatest artists don't inject their own ego, their own personality into their work. Instead, they have this almost magical power to completely erase themselves and actually become the character or the thing they're writing about.
For Keats, Shakespeare was the absolute master of this. He believed Shakespeare could just negate his own personality to become the evil Iago, the innocent Desdemona, and the tormented Othello. This was a direct shot at poets like Wordsworth, who Keats thought were kind of egotistical for always writing about their own feelings and experiences.
So it's clear these poets changed everything. They put the individual right at the center of the universe. But what's their ultimate legacy? Well, the most prophetic and maybe the most unsettling voice of all came from someone standing right next to them.
Yep, that voice belonged to Mary Shelley. And while her husband and his friends were celebrating the power of the individual, she was quietly exploring its dangers with a vision that was frankly decades ahead of its time.
I mean, think about it. In Frankenstein, you have a scientist whose unchecked ambition creates a destructive monster. A powerful warning right there. But then, in another book called The Last Man, she goes even further. She literally imagines a future where humanity completely wipes itself out. She saw our potential for self-annihilation long before anyone else.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question, doesn't it? The younger Romantics, they were heroes. They championed the individual against a really oppressive system. But in celebrating all that individual power, did Mary Shelley see something that they missed? Did she foresee the dark side of that ambition, a destructive force that, you could argue, still haunts us to this very day?